realm of the physical, like through the actions of the person. And some of the teachings, I would say, use kind of a technical Kabbalistic language, as that we've seen elsewhere, and that can be very, very, I know, weird and confusing for people, and we can get into some of that. And some of the teachings use a more general language. I mean, all of it is Kabbalistic, but I'm just talking about the language that is used, the phrases that are used. Some of it uses kind of non-technical, general terms, but those aren't necessarily easier to understand, but I'm just pointing out that there's a little mix of both. But the core assertion of almost the whole chapter, what seems to me to be really the primary point of many of the teachings in this chapter, is that it is possible, and maybe this is an assumption of the whole book, it's possible for a person to move from the world of separation to the world of unification. So a person can, through mind and through actions, move from the world of separation to the world of unification. So let's talk a little about let's delve into that a little bit, and then I'll pause and see if there's questions before we delve in. So we have to remember that when we read this chapter, and really the whole book, and you could even say any work of Jewish mysticism, that the world, this book maintains that the world as we usually experience it is fractured. So we, as we know ourselves, and we, as we experience our social world and our own internal individual world, we are part of that brokenness. We are the brokenness in some way. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's not that we are standing outside of a broken world and looking in at the broken world and saying, oh, there's a world we have to repair. We ourselves, by our own identification as separate selves, right? When I drill down on the idea that I am Josh and the world is happening to me, and my happiness is over here and then the world is over there, that when I do that, I'm manifesting or reenacting, you could say, or maybe better just to say, I'm causing the brokenness that I'm aware of. So this is, I guess I want to say, this is an assumption of Amud HaTefillah. It doesn't, in other words, the book doesn't bother to draw out or argue what I've just said to you. It's just an assumption that we are in a broken world and we're part of the brokenness. So it's only by overcoming that brokenness within ourselves, through the process of self-negation and other strategies that we've seen or that we can talk about, that it's only through doing that we repair the world. And so let's talk about what it means to the power of the word repair the world. I'm afraid that phrase is used so often that we forget its very, very profound implication, or it's a very profound, radical, astonishing assumption. And that is not only that if we say the world is broken, the assumption is not only that it can be fixed, but more to the point that bringing it into a state of repair is not creating some new reality. It's actually restoring the world to a state of unbrokenness, right? Or to a state of wholeness in some way. Now, obviously, if we were to fully repair the world today by everybody, living perfectly, we would of course say like the world is in a new state, but in some way it's also a restoration to a previous state of total unity that God once had in the world. Now, and so I guess what I want to say is that we are not separate unholy beings yearning for heavenly holiness to come down and transform us, right? It's not, God, please come down and, make us one. Rather, in the world of Amud Tefillah, we're liminal beings, meaning that we're in-betweeners. We're standing between the earthly and the heavenly, right? We're made out of material stuff, but we're not just animals and we're not inanimate rocks. We have this capacity, this part of us that is divine. And it's that part of us that is divine that yearns for the unification, right? That when the part of us that notices the world is broken and wants it to be whole, that is the divine within us. And that divine is trying to, in a sense, unify with that is the divine trying to unify within itself, trying to unify itself, right? So the human experience is part of the divine oneness, but it's sort of the lower realms of the divine that needs clarification and perfection. So let me pause there, because I've said quite a bit and I've said nothing at all, because what I mean by that is we haven't really gone into any of the teachings. I'm just making very general comments to help frame the 3 or 4 teachings that we're going to look at. Comments, questions? Lenny Ram?
I've always got something to say, huh?
I like it.
It's kind of peripheral, but I know next week you're doing a talk on Monday night. And is this what you mean about you stole the screen from me, Cheryl. Is this what you mean by talking about a theology, like a consistent theology in Judaism, which you said is sometimes lacking, which I agree completely, and that the Besh brought in a consistent theology, and this is it. I know it's not really germane in some way.
No, it's all good. You mean, is that what I'm talking about on Monday?
No, is that what you mean? Yeah, I'll be there on Monday and I'll find out what you're talking about. But
me too.
Yeah, but but what I mean is this what you mean about, because I've thought about this many times, is this what you mean about a consistent theology being brought into Judaism?
Well, no, I mean, the simple answer is no, and maybe the bigger answer is yes. I mean, on Monday, I'm talking about something that's a little more about thinking about the implications of Jewish theology for the world outside of the Jewish world.
Really?
But yeah, I mean, in some, so that's why I say the simple answer is no. But in some larger sense, yeah, because unification is unification. But no, I have a kind of narrower topic in a way.
Really?
But yes, any other questions about what the kind of framing remarks I've made? Okay, so, sorry, Cheryl, go ahead.
Yeah. Actually, I had a comment on, excuse me, on Lenny's question, which one time Arthur Kurzweil was at Shari Torah, and he said unequivocally that Kabbalah is the theology of Judaism. So that's one answer to that. And some of the remarks that you started with, when you talk about we're in a broken world, not outside looking at it, kind of what I got from some of the readings today was that part of the way you do this unification is it's kind of moving from just being in it to being able to kind of see what's going on from a higher level as though you're looking at it.
Oh, that's interesting.
Is also very much kind of what I think Buddhism says about how you relate to the world.
Right. Yeah, so it's sort of ironic. Like you have to step outside of it to get enough perspective to realize that you're not outside of it. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I'd buy that. Yeah, I do think, I mean, yeah, listen, you could think back to any number of Kabbalistic works, but, just to Sharai Ora, the Gates of Light book, which I keep referring to because it was at the seed of this class. But, it and every, really every Kabbalistic source begins with this like mind-blowing history of the cosmos, right? This is how the universe was created. It takes us as outside of ourselves as we could possibly be. And you go through hundreds of pages before you even get to the creation of human beings in these Kabbalistic works. And then you're talking about, human life, and maybe it's that exact move you're talking about, stepping outside so we can see ourselves as being in it. But, look, with regard to Arthur Kurzweil's, I didn't know Arthur Kurzweil came to Shari Torah. Good on us. I'm so glad I brought him. When was that?
Oh, it was years and years ago. I can't
Yeah.
remember
Cool.
how long ago.
Anyway, so
Before your time.
yeah, I figured it was before my time. I would have noticed if he had been. But in any event, I think that, with regard to the assertion, and, look, the Chazan will say the same thing. The Cantor Vitals would say there is no Jewish theology outside of Kabbalah. And, I think in some ways a traditionalist would, like an Orthodox position might be that as well. There's the annoying kind of academic part of my brain that just can't go there, because I just don't see it as historically, as much as I want it to be true. There's part of me that's the historian that kind of says, it's not really true. But if practically speaking, for me, and I might, and for us on this call, and I think for millions of Jews around the globe over the last couple generations, I think you can make the claim that it really is the only theology that's really going to speak to people in this moment, or that can speak to people in this moment, who are really deeply committed to having the Torah be something capital T true. I mean, one of the incredible features of Jewish modernity is the fact that somehow Kabbalah has been able to not only for some people kind of escape this. It's not that it's escaped the scrutiny of modernity and postmodernity, but that somehow in its flexibility and adaptability, it's been able to be, in the face of modernity and postmodernity, like precisely the theology that works, or the only theology that could work for some people. Not everybody would grant that, but anyway. So yeah, listen, for me, if there's going to be a Jewish theology, it's going to be rooted in Kabbalistic ways of knowing. So in any event, so let's start by delving in here. I wanted to start, where did I want to start? Where's my tab? So by the way, one thing that's interesting about this chapter is that for what it's worth, this is the chapter that is most different, or that is most different from the original work. Because the original, let's see, let me just find my first page. So we're starting on, the chapter starts on 181, but that's not where we're going to start. But so you've got teaching 144, and remember, only the integer numbers actually appear, the integer numbered teachings actually appear in the traditional work of the Amud HaTefillah. And then you've got 144, 145. Don't worry if you're not catching up with me, because it doesn't matter here. 4. I think there's only 4. They take these 4 teachings. And remember, the original Amud HaTefillah is not broken into chapters, but they take 4 teachings and they divide them into, God knows how many are in here, 10 or 12 or something. And they allow those 12 to constitute its own chapter. So in other words, he's added the editor here has added a lot of related teachings from other parts of the Best's work for whatever that's worth. So, okay, I wanted to start with 148.9, which is at page 198. And so, you know, let me just see if I can get my own notes here. Yeah, so I started to translate this myself, and it's extremely difficult. This is a it's a very, very difficult paragraph, but it's important to get right. And the reason we're starting here, and then I'll shut up and we'll actually dive in. The reason I wanted to start here is because, as I said in my introduction, there are some passages in this chapter that talk about creating unifications just in the mind or in the soul, versus other sections that talk about affecting it through deeds. This is in the former category. And so I just thought it was an interesting way for us to start. So, okay, so let me get my Hebrew in front of me, and then we're just going to do a line by line reading here. Okay. So Lenny, will you just read a sentence, and then we're probably going to pause?
Sure. One who knows how to effect the unification does it so that all divine faces be illuminated and that everything be blessed.
Okay, so to put this through our like special Kabbalah decoder, so affecting the unification means what? Well, let me ask you. I'll ask anybody here. What does that mean, to effect the unification?
Maybe it means yourself becoming holy so that you can be part of the unification.
Yeah, well, Lenny, it's a little hard to hear you. You're a little muffled, or maybe my volume was down. Sorry, say it again.
Maybe it means that you yourself attempt to become holy or holier because to affect the unification itself.
Yeah, right. You're trying to overcome your own perception of separateness, right? You're trying to realize in both valences of that word. You're trying to realize the unity that really is there. Remember that we are everything that exists. All there is in the world of Kabbalah, all there is God. All there is. I mean, there are things that kind of become so occluded from, you know, the divine light becomes so occluded within them that they become dangers to the divine, in a sense. But God created all things. That's all there is. There's only God. So we exist in some sense within the God space. So when we talk about making the unification, we're talking about realizing, making it real, but also becoming aware of our unity with God.
I just have a small point to ask. When they have the unification with a capital U, does that mean a personal unification, or is it the unification we hear about the Jewish people to?
Oh, wow. Great question. It's a really good question. My answer to that would be, first of all, as you know, there are no capital letters in Hebrew, so that's just a choice of the editor. The short answer, the simple answer is that this is talking about an individual, right? Because it says one who knows how, and that is reflected in the Hebrew. But the bigger answer is that there's always going to be a limitation on how much unity an individual can affect, right? It always involves, ultimately, the ultimate unification involves the unification of Bnei Yisrael, of the whole community of Israel, and then we could say even beyond that. But right now it's talking about a person who's trying to unseparate herself from the divine. Cheryl, and then Cliff, I think you may have had a hand up. I'm not sure. Cheryl? Okay.
I don't see it as just kind of a personal thing that one person does within themselves, because, you know, the extended metaphor of this is, I think, you know, we're part of God.
Yeah.
And so when we do, when we do the unification, we're not just doing it within ourselves. When
Right.
we do the unification, we are God unifying itself in,
Right.
or a
That's
piece
a
of
good.
God unifying itself.
Right. Right. I think that's right. Yeah. I meant simply that it's addressing a person who's, Josh Rose is sitting down for tefillah, and I am a spot. It's beginning by addressing me as the individual. But no, I think you're right. And of course, I think this follows from what you were saying, or maybe this is what you were saying, but the same divine that's within me is within everybody who's on this call and everybody around me. So when I talk about tapping into the divine, I'm necessarily in some way tapping into those around me. By the way, what we're not going to explore today, but we probably will next time, is those difficult passages where he talks about the ability to pray for someone else in a way that actually transforms them, right? Which I find very difficult. I mean, not so difficult to understand, but difficult to understand in a way that is actually means something to me, right? It makes sense to me that I can pray for myself, and through that process, I transform myself. But the notion that I can pray for a third party and transform them, it can't really be accessed rationally, but maybe through what you're saying. Once I tap into the Godhead, I'm tapping into the consciousness of all things. But anyway, that's a separate thing we're not going to go into today. Cliff, and then we'll keep going.
So many years ago, our daughter Lily had some issues, and we went to see somebody that was an energy mover. And he was able to move energy through her body and create a healthier living environment for her. And he trained me to do that as well. And so I was able to pull energy. It takes a lot of energy. So this goes back to your prayer, helping other people be connecting with other people through prayer. There might be, and we're talking about light, and we're talking about energy. There might be a connection between energy and light and movement, and that in fact we can't see everybody's energy field around them,
right?
Because we're not physically, our eyes are not designed to perceive that. But I can tell you for my own self that I was able to pull energy through Lily and make her feel better. And I knew that he could do it too, and he was a practitioner. I didn't do it often because it was so physically and emotionally exhausting that
Wow.
It was very, very difficult for me. But I believe that maybe some of this is relating in to this process.
Right.
Maybe.
Well, first of all, I'm really glad you shared that. That's really fascinating and moving. And it could be that my claim that I just can't get it is a confession of my own limited experience. I haven't done that kind of work. But we need to get Cliff a passport to Boulder, Colorado. Remember, that's where maybe that's why I left. The energies were pushing me. I was like, this guy doesn't fit here. But Cliff you need to be a dual citizen.
Yeah.
But no, that's
actually,
I love what you said.
Actually, Cliff just needs to show, when we start meeting in person again, Cliff needs to show up at Panayor, which is full of energy workers.
That's right.
Stop.
Yeah.
Stop.
Even people who don't get so exhausted by moving the energy around.
Right.
Stop.
No, that's
that.
cool.
Think about
Cliff,
all the high Titan davening.
Yeah, no, Cliff, I really, no, that's interesting, right? I mean, you're talking about like a realm of experience that's not kind of normative, but is part of the experience. And maybe it's, maybe the best would say like, yeah, that guy knows what I'm talking about. But in any event, so that's for another time. And then it says, one who knows how to effect the unification does it so that all divine faces be illuminated. Now, this is like technical Kabbalah, and we have not really talked about this so much, but when it talks about divine faces, in short, it's a way that the Kabbalists after the Ari talked about different dimensions of the God of God, different combinations of divine forces. There's the upper face, there's the lower face, there's the long face, the short face. There's different way. It's just different ways of talking about different sphirot and combinations of the divine powers, but we're not going to worry about that now. But and so that everything is blessed. Okay, Lenny, you want to read another one? Another sentence?
This is because the soul that manifests from its root, which is united with the origin of the tree of souls, is also united with the body of the person. And
Okay.
I'll make a comment. This is why I don't read this before the class.
Because it's just too obscure.
Yeah, it's just too abstract for
Yeah,
me.
it's difficult. It's really difficult. And if just as a side note to that, and I've mentioned this before, if nothing else, I hope that this class will, and some of you are already hip to this, but that this class will clarify for people that Hasidism, which is so often misunderstood as this sort of like simple folk tradition of like, it's just about singing nigunim and loving everybody, that's just such a gross misrepresentation. A lot of it is immensely difficult. And we're looking at some of the most difficult stuff, I would say, in Hasidic literature. And not all the Baal Shem Tov stuff is like this, but a lot of it is, and the Amud HaTefillah is. But in any event, okay, so this in some ways, I think this is conceptually not such a difficult thing, but the language is difficult. So the soul, okay, and I'm pretty sure the word here is neshama. Let me just double check. No, it's hanefesh. That's interesting. Oh no, well, yeah, it's interesting because he says, okay, so this is important. So you can, if you want to, you can, in your own book, where it says soul the first time, you might want to write the word nefesh, because in Hebrew, there's many different words for soul, and in English, there's not. And so this sentence reflects that. But in any event, this is how I would say. So close your eyes for a minute so you're not looking at your book, otherwise it'll be confusing. And here's how I would translate it. The individual's soul comes out from the root that cleaves to the tree of souls. Okay. The individual soul. Yeah. So that's what I would say. So, but we don't have to get caught up in it. But essentially what it's saying is that the soul that you have, the nefesh that allows you to have individual consciousness, and it's at work right now, perceiving me, right. But and the nefesh is the individual soul is sometimes referred to as like the lower soul. So that part of you, you're experiencing right now. It's alive in you. It's also connected to your own higher soul. Right. So the nefesh that's at work, just sort of integrating all the parts of your body and all of your senses and connects to your mind. That is also an extension of, it's related to the higher part of your own soul, which is your neshama. And that neshama is the part of you, like your highest being, right? That's the part of you that yearns to unite with God. It yearns to unite with other people. But in any event, what it's saying is all of that soul comes from something far beyond you, right? You share that with me, with every human being who lives. And it's as though it's the metaphor they use is it comes from the tree of souls. But maybe, I don't know, I feel like a more felicitous analogy is, think of the soul as like a living stream that's within you. And if you follow that stream to its source, it's just all in one huge ocean that makes up the whole world, right? Does that make some sense? So in other words, your own individual soul, its root is in a much higher place. It's in the divine one, okay? So it's united with your body and you, but ultimately goes beyond your body. That's why I said at the beginning of this that we as human beings are in this liminal space. Liminal meaning in between, where I am a body. I'm just like a piece of meat, but the piece of meat houses a soul that is actually eternal and that's part of God. Let me pause there. Does that make sense? Clarifying questions, challenges? Okay. Lenny, you doing okay? You just thinking? Okay. Um, okay. Now, then it says, Cheryl, you want to pick up where it says now?
Now, when the person wants to taste the blessed light, she or he rises from the state of the light that is perceived in the experience of the perceiving soul.
Okay,
So as to be
pause.
entirely with, okay.
Yeah, pause there. So I think this language is so beautiful, I think. When the person wants to taste the blessed light, okay? Now, what is the blessed light? It's not really a technical term. I don't think he means a specific thing here. I could be wrong. But he's saying, light of, it's so interesting because the phrase light, or the word light, which we throw around in spirituality, at some point we stop thinking about it as a metaphor. But remember that God is not light any more than God is an eagle or a king, right? It's just another image. So it's very, very hard to hold on to that. But it's a beautiful, light's an important image because light is, light shows us things that we couldn't otherwise see, but light is immaterial. Light can pass through some bodies, but it can also be obscured by solidity. So it's a useful metaphor, but it is a metaphor. But in any event, when we want to taste the light, what do you think that means? Anyone? When we want to taste the light, what does that mean? A person wants to taste the light.
That's the experience of unification.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's just right. Experience the original light of unification, the original light of God, right? And so that's, he's mixing metaphors also, because the neshama, I think he's also envisioning the neshama now as a light. So when you really want to connect to that divine light, that's the source of all things, and you want to taste it, you rise from the state of the light that is perceived. Okay, here's where the teaching gets complicated. The light that is perceived in the experience of the perceiving soul. Okay, so he hasn't said where you have to rise to, but you're starting as a soul that perceives the light. Right? So you perceive God, or you have notions about God, or right now you're listening to the Baal Shem Tov make allusions to God. So you're outside of it. You are perceiving it. Okay? Now, even if you had a very clear idea of it, so let's say through the course of this conversation, we have a perfectly enlightened understanding, pun intended, of God. It's still possible to be in a state of consciousness in which you are perceiving it as an outsider. And he's saying, if you want to taste the light, if you want to really, by which I think he means experience the unification, you're going to have to rise up from that state of perception. Okay. From that state of perceiving it as an outsider. And notice, by the way, I said this passage is really hard to translate. I think he accidentally left a trace of evidence of how incredibly difficult this is, because after when it says perceiving soul in quotations, and then there's a period, and then there's a small s, I think my guess is he went back and forth like 10 times as to whether to start a new sentence there, as I did, because it's a long jumbled sentence in Hebrew. And I think this is like a trace example of his struggle with the translation. It's an incredibly difficult passage to translate. Okay, so as to be entirely within the state of perception itself, uniting with this, which is the highest root of one's soul. So I think that what he's talking about here in language that is very difficult is simply the idea that you have to go from being a third person, from the third person, meaning you're standing outside, and even maybe go from being second person, where you're relating to the light as a you or it, into like just dissolving into perception with a capital P itself. Like you become pure consciousness. I think that's what he's describing. Okay, so let me pause there. Does that, somebody want to change? Cliff really likes this. He's giving double thumbs up repeatedly. Go ahead, Cheryl.
I see it as moving in the opposite direction from what you were describing.
Okay.
This goes back, I'm sorry, I keep coughing. That goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning about, do you see yourself in the broken world, experience yourself as part of the broken world, or do you have like this higher level? And to me, the way it sounds is the light that is perceived is kind of the more lower or more broken state. And the perceiving soul is kind of the stepping back and being more, and to me, again, this, I'm really drawing from the little I know about Buddhism.
Right.
That would, that you go from, it's sort of like the content of your thought, the what is perceived,
right,
to what's the process of perceiving. So, and as you get into that process of perceiving, you get more unified, you get closer to God, you get a better understanding of what is.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, one thing I want to say, so if that helps you get there, that's fine. I don't know, it's hard for me to, because I think we're caught on what the words mean to you versus what they mean to me. One problem with this passage is that he's translated, well, I don't want to say problem. One, it's noteworthy that he has made the translator's choice to translate the word perception, to translate the word sechel as perception. And I'm not saying he's wrong, but one could also translate it as like mindfulness or consciousness or something, or thoughtness or something like that. So that's another layer of difficulty here. He has many appearances of the word sekel, hasakela, maskil. So it becomes very, very difficult. But I think what's happening is we're talking about going out of subjectivity and becoming part of this process of pure consciousness itself. I think that's the leap that we're trying to make, away from God. I'm perceiving God as an other, and wow, isn't God beautiful? And I'm really feeling it, to just whoop, you vaporize that own ego consciousness, and you're just part of the perception or consciousness itself. I actually think the word perception is not a good word here, as I realize as I'm saying it, because I think that whereas the word consciousness can lend itself, I think, at least in my mind, to the notion that there's like a sort of thought energy flowing through the world, the word perception to me always leans towards a perceiver. And I think that's what the Baal Shem Tov is trying to get away from in this concept. But I'm not sure. So, okay, you want to keep reading where it says perception, or sorry, where it says they become one?
They become one by the activated mere presence of awareness, which in itself is the light and the life force drawn from the person's root that is uniting them.
Okay, and so I think that what he's trying to say here, what he wants to emphasize is it's not just that you kind of like, okay, here's this individual piece of meat and consciousness, and I need to throw it over there, get rid of it, and then I can ascend, and then perceive the light. He's trying to say it is within you already, right? It is part the capital C consciousness or the capital P perception that you're relating to is already within you. It's the thing that lets you, it's rooted to, it's part, the bit of you that allows you to navigate the world and to talk and to be on this call, right? It's already within you. So this unification in a sense exists. The only reason you don't perceive it exists is because your consciousness is in the way. You're perceiving yourself as other from it. And as soon as you can let go of that, immediately, boom, there's just this energy of consciousness or of perceptivity or whatever unifying you with it. Okay, so then, okay, and the person rises from level to level, and in each world, there are endless levels. So what does he mean by worlds? I think he means, well, I mean, I know what he means. Kabbalistically, there are one of the ways that the Kabbalists navigated the distance between material and the immaterial is by positing the existence of many, 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 many worlds through which the divine light slowly became more and more occluded in the material world. So he's really just talking about a process of elevation of the soul, where the soul more and more and more understands that it is the uniting thread between God and the person. And then it says, one rises from level to level with subdued ego and inner nothingness, which he's chosen to type there as no thingness. So before we get to the second half of that sentence, let me just read that again. One rises from level to level with subdued ego and inner no thingness. Anybody want to take a crack at putting that into your own words?
You're dissolving the divisions within yourself and within the universe.
Right. And the trick here, and here, I mean, I'm probably going to sound something like a Buddhist, but I'm not trying to change.
I think you can't help it with this.
Yeah, I'm not trying. Right, I'm not trying to be clever. I'm not trying to change the language, but what's changing here is just consciousness, right? There's no magic trick happening. There's no out of body, thing going on. It's just the consciousness refining itself to get to the point where the ego understands, like, oh, everything I'm staring at and everything coming out of me is God. When I say staring at, I mean anything, this godness that I'm trying to conceive of and that I think is like coming at me in the world. That's exactly the same thing that is allowing me to perceive it. It's all just that, right? All being is just soul. And when the lower soul realizes that, you just have unification. And when that happens, necessarily the ego has diminished or is gone, maybe, right? Because you can't at the same time think I am I and God is God, and the same time have a sense of I'm just pure soul. So I would say that there's that the egolessness is not a byproduct of this, or not even a prerequisite. It's the same thing. It happens simultaneously.
Was always there.
Huh?
So the egolessness was always there. It's just a different experience.
That's right. It's a different level of the soul, right? And by the way, I think one of the beautiful things about the particularly Jewish way of talking about different levels of the soul is, I don't know, tonally, it puts us in a position not to say that ego is sinful or ego is horrific, right? Because ego is really an expression of a lower level of this magnificent, gorgeous, perfect thing. And we need it. We got work to do down here. And if I don't have me and I'm just the neshama, or if my whole life is, if I feel like being me is inherently bad And then I'm just going to want to cling to neshama all the time. And I'm just going to be meditating and going off into a cave somewhere. But Hashem needs me to do work down here. So I need my nefesh because there's stuff to do and there's repair to do. And so being in an ego state, in a healthy Kabbalistic ego state, where I have a larger awareness simultaneously that my ego is a limited tool in the service of the divine, it's not a sinful thing. We got to do it, right? So I think that's a way to understand why the Kabbalists insisted on talking about different levels of the soul. Lenny, you have a question.
I'm just going to free associate because there's not a lot of people here. So this
Do
kind of
it.
reminds me about reading about the infinite multiverse, and then you asking, what do you think that means? And of course, I believe in that case, the people who describe it also don't know what it means as much as
Right.
but it's because you start to get into these technical kinds of quandaries, and maybe the translation and the person rises from level to level. So one would think, you're going up the Kabbalistic tree, and then it says in each world there are endless levels, kind of saying that you get stuck if you got stuck inside that level, you would never reach the next level, which
Right.
is all part of the infinite multiverse thing. And I don't know what that means at all, but I just find it interesting wording and technical concept.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just looking at the Hebrew. Yeah, it does say, V'hayam ala ora madrigot hasfirot ad ein sof. Yeah, I mean, it does say infinite levels. Maybe that's, I'm glad you pointed that out, because that is, you could,
I won't even venture what that means. So.
well, I mean, I'm not sure, but what I think it's referring to is it's saying, look, the ascent is infinite in the sense that you're never going to get, a human being's not going to get to the level where they're truly at the ultimate level, the source of all being. We can't, no man sees my face and lives, right? We can't actually get to Ein Sof. It's beyond the created world. And so I think maybe it's just an allusion to that. He's saying, look, we can go as high as we can go. There are infinite levels above that, but let's not bother with that. I think that's what it's saying. It's certainly not saying there are infinite levels between us and a proper holy level of consciousness. He's not saying it's impossible to get to a proper level, but we do need to understand that once we get to if one were to get to the highest possible prophetic level, reached by Moshe Rabbeinu, we still wouldn't even be scratching the surface of what Hashem truly is. That's how I understand it, right? Okay. Okay, so then let's go to until reaching the place from where the root of one's own soul is hewn, right? And then his note here, I think, is helpful. Note 1066. Revealed to the person from within the root of awareness of pure consciousness as such, right? In other words, when you get to the point where you get to the root of your soul, the place your soul comes from, you're in a place of pure consciousness. All right. I will say other religious traditions have a much simpler language than we have for describing at least very similar phenomena. Okay. Okay. And thereby one binds oneself in all of the worlds to its root by the means of unification practices. Okay. Given from mouth to mouth. I'm just going to leave that there. Okay. Well, somebody want to read where at the top of 199 where it says thereby?
Actually, what I want to do is not leave that there.
Okay.
To me, I've been waiting
Great.
with
Okay.
great anticipation for us to get to the phrase unification practices.
Okay.
Because for me, it's actually this like physical frustration I feel as
Yeah.
we're studying this, that
How do I get there?
we're trying to like, well, it's not so much how do we get there, it's for me, us having this discussion by reading words from a book and then
Yeah.
having kind of a normal discussion about it
Right.
is never going to get us to understanding
Right.
of this. And it's kind of like what Cliff was saying, you know, if you haven't experienced, then, you know, there may not be good words for it, but you know it exists.
Right.
You know that that's the possibility. So to me, like as we read the whole book and as we were reading Gates of Light, you know, I was kind of sitting there saying, well, you know, are we ever going to talk about the practices that you
Right.
do to get to this understanding? So, and they're very, you know, you can't usually read about them. They're not usually written down. You know, it
Yeah.
says it's given from mouth to mouth, you know,
Yeah.
not as writing. But there is a chapter that we skipped, and I don't think it's accidental that we skipped it, chapter 4, specific, you know, it's also not very detailed, but it refers specifically to some Lurianic unification practices. And I
Right.
think he refers back to that chapter in this. So
Yes.
it's like,
Yeah. I
to
mean,
me, that's the core. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I would say this. That I do think that ultimately, yes, applying this to practice, which is not what I'm trying to do in this class.
Yeah.
I mean, in other words, it's not a class of practice, but
Mhm.
yeah, that, I mean, ultimately that's what one does. But what the reason we skipped chapter 4 and the reason that I skipped over this is because this unification, I don't know that the answer for us in our community, in our time, is the Lurianic practices of unification, because they're obtruse and obscure and they're very difficult. And I actually believe that if we did them and learned them the way they're laid out, it would in some ways be more frustrating. But I do think that there are other embodied practices where we can, in our own way, in our own, with our own voices, meaning like in a language that makes sense for us. I do think, I mean, of course, I know there are practices that we can do where we sort of give our riff, so to speak, on what the Besht is saying. And I have my own kind of vocabulary of these things that I use for myself, vocabulary in quotation marks, my own imagery that I use, my own breathing practices that I use. But you know, they don't come with the Isaac Luria stamp of approval, because that's stuff that frankly I often, my eyes gloss over and I don't understand much of it. But listen, I think what you're saying is fair and legitimate. You're right. You don't get there by reading a book. This stuff has to be put into practice in prayer and contemplation. So I want to come back to that in a second, but Cliff's trying to get in there.
Well, no, I want to follow up with what the chair was saying, because I think that connects up with this given from mouth to mouth. I mean, it's a double-edged meaning there, the given from mouth to mouth, because it goes back to what you were saying, Rabbi, earlier, a few weeks ago, where you said there's a lot of sexual innuendo maybe tied into this, or relationship innuendo, because mouth to mouth could just as easily be kissing, but it could just as easily also be talking as well, as a way to communicate. And you know, when I read this, and I'm really, really lucky in my mind, because 10 years ago, I would not be in a place where I could understand what we're talking about even a little bit. I'm understanding a little bit here, not a lot. But, you know, I'm fortunate that I've done I've mentioned before, some meditation, and you know, which is what you're saying is the terminology of meditation, you know, wasn't difficult to get from the 4 classes I had to learn how to meditate. And I've had other meditation classes, Chinese and breathing and some of these other things we're talking about, to a point where you can, depending on what your mind is at and how busy it is, and using prayer, or maybe not using prayer, get to this, I know I hate to use this word self-actualization, but in a sense, this communication and connection with God.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think, Cheryl, you're on the right track. Actually, I think that there are if it was complicated, nobody'd get there.
Well, I don't know
They're making it
well,
complicated. They're trying to make it complicated
yeah,
in my
well, I
mind.
don't know.
But
I don't know. That may or may not be true. I think that it is very complicated.
of course, it's
Well, sorry.
complicated.
Let me refine that.
Yes, you're right.
I mean, within the Kabbalistic tradition,
Yes, exactly.
it is very
Right.
complicated. I'm
Yes,
not
yes, yes.
saying there are other ways in, there are other paths of perception, but I'm just saying, if I'm trying to be authentic to the Kabbalistic tradition, when he says unification practices, he's talking about a very, very obscure process of interchanging of letters and names. And this, it's very, very complex and not stuff that I have a deep understanding of. But to your point, your second point about the phrase given mouth to mouth, I do think you're right. I think we can see that as multivalent. I think one way of understanding it is that you're communicating directly with Godness, not with God's self, but
Right.
with God energy. But in addition to that, and I think he's also pulling on this other meaning, given from mouth to mouth in the Kabbalistic tradition, what that means is when an author says this is a tradition given mouth to mouth, what that means is and this appears in Share Torah, Share Ora. This appears a lot, that phrase. It means there's no way I'm putting into writing these deepest secrets. If you want to know these, you have to find a Kabbalistic teacher and he will teach them to you one-on-one. And then there's a whole thing about certain teaching couldn't be taught one-to-one. There had to be a third person in the room. I mean, there's a whole elaborate hierarchy created by the later Kabbalists that does indeed make this very complicated. But just to circle back, because Cheryl, I think you're making a really, really important point. Ultimately, if we study this only in the way we're studying it, it's a Jewish studies class, and it's not about enriching our prayer life. And so the question is, how do we achieve these unifications in ourselves? I do think there's a worthy class that I could take a crack at teaching. I think I could teach it, but I'm not by any means the teacher for such a class on practices. And I've referred you all to a book called, I don't have it here with me, I to the Infinite, EYE to the Infinite, which is a book of it's a very, very unusual book. And I mean that in the very, very best way possible, because what it is, so let's just take a moment to I to the Infinite. One sec. I will put the link. If you promise to try to buy it through Amazon, through Powell's, and instead of Amazon, I will put the Amazon link in the chat just because it's the first one I found. But try to track down the title through Powell's and give them your money. The reason this book is so unusual is because, to be frank, most books, in my experience, most books on Kabbalistic practice are heavy on practice and a little light on the Kabbalah. Meaning, there's a balance between practicality and authenticity. And, there's just a lot of stuff. I don't mean it as a criticism necessarily. They're people of the authors, and people are trying to do good things. But very often they have a very light Kabbalistic knowledge, and they're drawing heavily on breathing practices and Buddhist practices, and they're kind of mashing them together. And, if it does good in the world, God bless him. This guy comes from the frum world, which is not in and of itself a recommendation, but he knows his stuff very well, and he puts in all kinds of breathing practices and meditations that come from the tradition and come from his experience. Yeah, it's a superb book. So Cheryl, I would highly recommend this for you, looking to bridge that gap.
I'm going to make some recommendations back, which is you don't have to go to Boulder to find the mystics, and Portland and, you know, the whole west coast of Oregon is full of people who teach this, you know, like for real, not,
Right.
you know, pulled it out of, you know,
Right.
my page of Buddhism and
For
put a
sure.
Jewish star on it.
For sure.
There are people, you know, there are people who know this and transmit it. So it's, you know, it's not in heaven. It's right where you can grasp it if you want.
Right.
And I was also going to suggest another really good book is Jewish Meditation by R.A. Kaplan, who was,
Yes.
you know,
mean,
also from the frum world and also a physicist.
Yeah, absolutely. No, Ari Kaplan was amazing. I mean, of blessed memory, he was amazing. But I never found I found Jewish meditation to be very illuminating, but also of limited practical use. Not of no practical use, but I found it to be of limited practical use. Like, for example, one of the things he talks about, like the value of memorizing the Amida. Now, I've memorized the Amida, but you know, how many of my congregants can make use of that? But I think everybody should read that book, but I just think that this book is more useful and practical, that could go hand in hand with R.A. Kaplan's book. But to your point, yeah, there absolutely are teachers of this stuff that you don't have to go far away to get it. Go ahead, Lenny.
I was going to make a joke, but timing is everything, and Cheryl's serious.
Don't you hate that?
What?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
I didn't hear that. Do I want to?
No. He was saying he was saying he was going to make a joke, but timing is everything, and the moment passed. Yeah. I find as I was the youngest child in my family, which always put me in the position of kind of joking from the margins. And like so I still have, like, when there's a conversation going on and I want to make a joke, there's like a timer going on in my head. If somebody jumped in and stepped on my joke, I've got like, okay, there's 3 seconds left, 2 seconds. Oh, it's too late. Anyway, okay, so, all right. So, and yes, so sorry, Cheryl, last word. I'm going to put a lot of thought into what you're saying. I don't see this happening before I leave Sherry Torah, but I'm going to be around, and I'm still me seeking meaning and wanting to look for opportunities. And yeah, I mean, I think there does need to be some enlightened practice here. So
I just finished reading Razor's Edge, and they went over the practice, the Hindu practice of that really rich worldly people would throw everything off and leave all their money to their wife at 50 and become wandering sadhus. So I don't know if that's really, I know you're turning 50, if that's actually your plan.
yeah, no.
Lenny,
no.
were you talking about the novel? The novel,
Yeah,
The Razor's Edge?
Yeah.
I've heard that's excellent. Okay. Okay. From there, a new light is drawn. I'm in the second line, in the middle of the line, roughly on page 199. From there, a new light is drawn, and one returns the light from above to below, just as one has ascended by the light of awareness, receiving one's share of the light according to what one can maintain. So, so we're talking about upper light and lower light before, like the upper light being just consciousness itself, just the existence of awareness. And then the lower light of the person slowly ascending to that from the realm of ego to consciousness itself. And then I think that this last part means, if I'm being totally honest, I don't 100%, I'm not 100% sure of my reading here. It says, "V'notel chelek min ha'or hahu l'chiyot nafsho b'torah u'v'mitzvot k'fi shu'or." Oh, he's not translated this appropriately. 1 second, sorry. He's, by leaving it more vague, he's made it much more difficult to understand. Okay, so what he says is you go up to this light and you return it and bring it down from above to below on the level Asher Allah, essentially to the level that your own mind will allow, right? So he's got that part right, according to what one can maintain. This is according to your capacity to carry it around with you. And then he says, Ad hagi'u lamata benefesh sechli, until it reaches below in the soul of the individual awareness, v'notel chelek min ha'or, and one carries or lifts part of this light, l'chiyut nafsho, to maybe it's l'chayot nafsho, to enliven one's soul, to bring life to one's soul. And here's the part where he really failed to translate, b'torah uv'mitzvot, k'fi shi'ur shoresh neshama toshi yachol lisbol, through Torah and mitzvot, according to one's capacity. So I think what this means is, I believe it's something like a threefold process. The first part is elevating from a limited consciousness to the broadest awareness and achieving a level of like unindividuated consciousness and experiencing that ego evaporation of pure consciousness and unity. Then there's a process, I think, of bringing it all back home, of taking that awareness and allowing it to that energy and the awareness of unity and bringing it back into the narrow place of your individuated consciousness and applying it to your life, right? Allowing it to be with you. Like you have, your consciousness is transformed by this experience, and you're carrying the awareness of it into what you do in the world. Does that make sense? So I don't know why he chose to not it's not that he obscured it through his translation. He literally just doesn't translate it, and I think it makes it much harder to understand. Anyway, so and I don't know if this, this doesn't quite get to your earlier point, Cheryl, but it feels like a branch off of your question, because he's talking about how do you put this into practice, and whatever. You think you were addressing how do we get to the practice of that ascent to unindividuated consciousness, and that's, we talked about that without really answering it. But then he's talking about once you have that experience, how do you not just go back to being your old ordinary self? Somehow that experience just touches you and you're consciously folding it into how you read Torah and how you do mitzvot and how you relate to other people with a heightened awareness of, ooh, I've touched the unity of all things. And I have to allow that to become embodied in my actions in this world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Rabbi, would you say again the part you said he didn't translate at all, that he...
Yeah, the part he did not translate is something like, I'm doing this on one foot, but I would say...
That's okay.
I would say... Okay, so where it says, thereby one would raise all of the levels and the divine attributes up to the infinite itself?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm picking up there, because that's where he begins to skip around. So I would say, umamshich misham, or one draws from there light, the choser, and brings it back, or merido, and brings it down, mima'ala lamata, from above to below, b'ma'alot asher Allah, on the levels, I guess on the level according to which he ascended. In other words, according to his capacity. Ba'or hahaskela, according to the level of consciousness he attained. ad shehigio lamata, until it arrives down below, benefesh hasichli, in his own individual consciousness.
Mhm.
V'notel chelek min haor, and he carries a part of this light, or carries a part from this light, lichiot nafsho, to enliven or to revitalize his soul in Torah and in mitzvah, kafi shi'ur shoresh nishmato she'echol lispol, according to the measure of the root of his soul that he can endure or carry. I mean, that last phrase was pretty baffling.
Mhm.
I mean, in my own
Um,
translation was baffling. So.
Yeah. I'm wondering if that little piece he left out of the translation is his way of saying this is only given mouth to mouth.
Oh,
That,
interesting.
like that's the part that's kind of it's touching on the practice part of
Yeah,
it,
interesting.
or
like it.
the kind of real life part of it. And that's his way of carrying on the tradition.
That's very interesting. But that would then, he would then be in the position of essentially saying, well, the Baal Shem Tov thought it was good enough to put into writing, but I'm second guessing him, which is a tough one. But you could be right.
Well,
Maybe
but the Baal Shem Tov didn't put it into writing. Somebody else did.
Well, right. But whoever put it into writing is the one who said it should be mouth to mouth. But right, good point. Okay, but yeah, that could be. Okay. So, but I guess my chatima on this is the main point of all of this is that even when the primary work is the work of consciousness, even when we're starting at the level of consciousness, prayer, meditation, whatever we want to call it, ultimately we want to bring it down into our practices to have our work in this world be softened by an awareness of unification, right? That I've touched the one, and it's not just, gee, I want to go back and have that experience. It's that allow me to draw that into how I see and act in the world. Okay.
At that point that you were making about how he couldn't bring the mitzvot and the Torah into this, really to me, it negates a lot it makes me distrust something in this book. If I can digress a little bit, a so-called Kabbalistic master or something came and gave a talk at what was it called in Boulder? Aish.
Yeah, Ish Kodesh, yeah.
And he was going on and on about how one had to purify themselves and make themselves ready to hear that. Man, I just lost it on him. I just completely went off on him. And I said, you come into an Orthodox synagogue, what do you think that people should be doing to purify themselves?
Right.
What are you talking about?
Right.
It was like an insult. I walked out, and I was really upset by that.
Yeah.
And in the same way, I have the same reaction to this, in that it's not that he doesn't say it, but he soft pedals it to the point where he says, according to what one can maintain. I mean, if there's anything that you can achieve out of this book, it's practicing the mitzvot and yourself a little to the Torah, not to the other parts of it are much more difficult.
Yeah.
That at least is concrete, but he decided to take a pass on that, so I'll just leave it at that.
Well, I think I think what he means by according to what one can maintain, I think he's just I just read it as he's just acknowledging that some people are going to be massively transformed by this experience and be able to really maintain it, and other people, may not have fully integrated the experience. I think he's just recognizing a diversity of experiences and levels of perception. But I'm not sure.
That's very liberal of him, so I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's just naming a truth. He's just naming a truth. Some people are going to, it's for better or for worse. It's just the nature of the world. I'll just give it. We've just lived through a real experience on this phone, on this Zoom call. There are teachers who would have a level of understanding that they would have been able to relate to Cliff's point about energy work, or they would have been able to share embodied experiences and practices. this teacher isn't at that level, and there are teachers who wouldn't be able to clarify any of these teachings at all. I just think I think he's saying, this is not necessarily the Hollywood ending where you get to that level and boom, everyone is like, yay, I get it now. I think he's saying this is hard and not everyone's going to be able to touch it. That's how I hear it. But I love that you got PO'd at the guy, and I share your frustration. This idea, and I don't hear this text in the same as being in the same category as you did, but you do, so that's fine. But I do understand when a Kabbalistic teacher keeps saying like, oh, it's just around the corner, it's just around the corner, it's just around the corner. You're not there yet, or you couldn't really understand it, but I'm going to tell you about it anyway. And this like endless purification, it's like at some point it does feel like maybe the teacher's just hiding behind that. Like if you just keep saying like, well, people can't understand it unless they attain perfection, then at some point it's like, well, why are you even talking about it? Right? It's like just you have nothing to offer if you can't actually enlighten people about it. And if there's this fabled level of purification that's required before you can open the Zohar, I'm kind of calling your bluff, and I'm telling you that I think you maybe just don't know how to open the Zohar. I say that with a little bit of arrogance on, taking Lenny's side on this, because I sort of bought into that initially. I mean, years ago when I started learning this stuff, I kind of felt like, oh, I can't understand it because I haven't attained that level. And, I think that can really be misunderstood. It's true. You can be overly cavalier with this stuff, and it's very, very deep and profound stuff. So you must not be, but it's also possible to be so in a state of like, you can have that sense of like worthlessness that really prevents you from growing because you're talking about nothing. It's like, yeah.
And I don't think you need to build it up so that only Madonna can understand it.
That's right. All right. Listen, don't diss Madge. You never know. I don't know what her level is.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. I want to go to gosh, with the time left, it's really tough because we don't quite have enough time to bite off a full chunk here. Let me just see. I might just call it good, but let me just check one thing out. Sorry, guys. Let me just look at what I was going to do. Well, yeah, I'm going to leave it there for now because I can't find it. I had a piece that I was going to do today, but it's another piece, but it's all of the pieces I was going to do are too long for us to do in 10 minutes. And I have a hard stop in 7 minutes. So I'm not going to try it and just cause more confusion. So do take a look at that book, Cheryl. I've recommended it before to people, and I love it. It's beautiful. I haven't picked it up in a while, but I started reading it, I think a year ago or maybe a little more. And I was really impressed, so much so I think I wrote the author, which I rarely do, and said thank you.
I'm going to look through my computer. I think I may have a PDF of it somewhere that I haven't looked at in a while.
Oh, Lenny says it's not available on Amazon. You know what you should do? Go to biblio.com, BIBLIO, which searches small bookstores across the country. Either that or Addall, ADDALL.com, which does the same thing. All right. Have a beautiful day. See you soon. Bye.
Okay, thank you.